So I'd like to share with you the story of Purim. Now, Purim is a Jewish holiday that's been celebrated for a long time. It's based in the Megillah, which is the Book of Esther. It's the only book in the Hebrew canon that does not mention God's name, which is interesting. And some of the rabbis' teachings have been that we don't have to practice Yom Kippur in the world to come. Purim will be celebrated. Now, Purim is a powerful story, and the setting of the story is Shushan, which is in Persia, or what was called Babylon at the time, and set in 500 BCE, and semi-historic because what had happened, and of course it's also mythic and legendary, and a narrative that's very interesting. There's twists and turns and who's winning, who's losing, what's going to happen next. It's a great story. And thank you, Bob Marley, by the rivers of Babylon, we sang and wept as we remembered Zion. So Zion, Zion, is another word for Jerusalem, and another word for the land that the Hebrews called Israel, or really Judea and Shomron. There is no J, by the way, in Jewish. It's from Yehuda. There's a Yud. There's no J in Hebrew. And Yehuda was one of the 12 tribes of Israel and happens to be the residual tribe, one of the main residual tribes, also the tribe of Levi, that has survived through the centuries and has become what we call Jewish. And in that time, the Babylonians, the Assyrian king Nebuchadnezzar, destroyed the first temple, the Temple of Solomon, and the Israelites were scattered. Many tribes, who knows where they went? The Bob Marley and the Rastafarians believe that Ethiopia is where Hebrew tribes went, and that's super likely. And there's actually the Falashas, which is an Ethiopian tribe, which now many of whom have migrated to what is called Israel, modern state now. And so the setting is in Persia by the rivers of Babylon, where we've been exiled after the destruction of the Temple of Solomon, which is now the Western Wall and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And of course, it's the heart of Jerusalem and the Old City. It's an amazing place. Of course, Jerusalem is so diverse and so complex and so multicultural, and actually has sustained in many ways with a lot of tolerance. And oh my God, the flavors, the smells, the diversity is profound, as are the tensions in the heat of the region we call the Middle East. So, but back then we'd been exiled, and thus began the persecution of Jews, and there was a tremendous anti-Semite named Haman, and every time we mention his name, we make noise. So the holiday of Purim is like, I would say it's akin in some ways to the Mardi Gras. It's a party, it's a masquerade party. It's a lot of fun. It's a costume party. We all dress up, kids dress up. It's a very fun family event, and we read this, what we call the Megillah, which is the Book of Esther. And it's about Esther as the hero. It's really a story of feminine heroism. And it's also about Mordecai, who's her uncle, and Haman's going to kill the Jews. He doesn't like Mordecai. He's going to hang him on gallows, and Haman winds up hanging on the gallows that he built for Mordecai. And King Ahasuerus is inclined to advice. Haman was his advisor. Then Mordecai becomes his advisor. And the story goes, Queen Vashti was the queen, and she resisted being dominated. Again, it's really a feminist story, and an honoring of Esther, and Ishtar is another way for calling her, which is who she's a very deep goddess in the tradition. And Mordecai goes back to Marduk, who is one of the deities in the Babylonian creation story. And also Marduk becomes Nimrod, and Nimrod is the builder of the Tower of Babel, an African warrior that comes to Babylon, builds the Tower of Babel, puts Abraham, our ancestor, our root ancestor in some ways, into an oven. Abraham, how interesting is that? And then Abraham survives that, and that's such a metaphor and powerful story in itself, and that is in the biblical narratives. And by the way, I see biblical narratives as a collective dream, and each of us interprets in our own way. And the rabbis for centuries have done that. They each interpret, and then they debate, and they see where they come to consensus. There's a diversity of opinions. It really is what justice and wisdom in some ways is about, is that dialogue and interpretive views, and whose view do we really abide by? So, background of the story. So we celebrate this holiday, and we're advised to get so drunk that we don't know the difference between the good guy and the bad guy. Protagonist, antagonist. There's protagonists in the story. There's an antagonist in the story. There's the villain, there's the heroes. And it's a fantastic story. We read it, we dance, we party, we're going to get killed. Oh no, we don't. We survive. Yay. We tell the story, we party in basic Jewish holiday structure. And it's a blast. I've loved this holidays. I've been Megillah Gorilla. I've been all kinds of different, you costume up however you want to. And but the last chapter is very troublesome. So in the last chapter, after Haman gets hung in the gallows, anti-Semites lose, at least on that level of power, and there's a rising of respect. Actually, in reality, the Persians then King Cyrus enabled the Jews. There was Nehemiah and Ezra, these two prophets, and there was this movement to return to Zion. So there's that longing to return to Zion. Please understand, this is not a political statement, began in 500 BCE at the first exile. It continued after the second exile, after King Cyrus allowed the Jewish people to go back, rebuilt the temple. King David ruled. There were different kings. Then the Romans came in. Romans wound up destroying the temples around the time of Jesus. And Jews were once again exiled for 2,000 years. A little less than that, but around that. And in the diaspora. And then came the creation of the State of Israel and what's happening in our modern days. And in that last chapter, there's a rabbi named Arthur Wasco, and I recommend, he's in the Shalom Center in Philadelphia. He's really prophetic. As far as rabbis go, Abraham Joshua Heschel and Arthur Wasco, amongst others, have really been prophetic, have been like prophets, have called out the wrongs of the Jewish people. And so there is something very powerful about calling out the wrongs of the Jewish people for Jewish people to do themselves. And I think there is that now as a political part. There is that strength in the Jewish tradition of opposition, of defiance, if you will, of calling out for our higher selves, calling out for us to be a better people. Now, we get to call ourselves out, but others calling us out, that's a little trickier. It's like African Americans, they get to call themselves out, and they get to call white people out for the wrongs. And our calling out Black people for their wrongs is much trickier in the sort of progressive identity politics world. That's all the politics I want to share right now, however you feel about all that. So the last chapter, and Arthur Wasco, a rabbi I respect a great deal, really calls out what's happening in Israel right now. And again, I'm into politics, hard to avoid. And that last chapter is troublesome because what happens is Jewish militants, zealots, I suppose, go and have war with Persians. Were they fighting anti-Semites? Were they fighting terrorists? Were they fighting the Cossacks or the terrorists? Or who were they fighting? I don't exactly really know. I've got to study that further. But 70,000 Persians died during that time. And there are echoes of that in what's happening now. And Rabbi Wasco points that out in ways that I recommend you listen to. He does a much better job of this than I do. But I want to say that because there are protagonists, antagonists, or good guys and bad guys. We have good guys and bad guys in us. We have protagonists and antagonists in our own identities, in our own lives, unless we're saints. And saints don't complain. And so complainers and grievancers and haters and ragers and those that really don't respect one another and don't understand one another, don't have empathy and compassion for one another, of every race and ethnicity and culture, in our own families, in our own selves. There's an intermixing of good guys and bad guys. So I don't necessarily recommend you get drunk to recognize that, but I think that recognition is very important. So we're not vilifying others without taking responsibility ourselves. Who's throwing the first stone? And there's powerless and there's power, and there's the importance of responsible power. So I think all those are important themes. I hope this has been useful to you. I'm telling the story just impromptu because that's how I go. And editing, I'm not a great editor. I do my best to speak with coherence and clarity. I hope this has been interesting and valuable. Please comment. Okay, be well. Bye.